Hi guys, this week is Mary Queen of Scots, and of course we did her when we covered Scotland. So here she is again, this time in the French timeline. Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Mary, Queen of Scots.
One day we will be remembered.
Hi guys, because this is the last episode of season 2, I'm going to go a little crazy this week. And I'm going to say this at the beginning instead of at the end. If you want bonus episodes, there's a lot over on Patreon. And if you just really don't like commercials, you can join my Patreon for free and get all the same videos that I post other places, but without commercials. So head on over to my Patreon if you don't like commercials at patreon.com/longlivethequeenpodcast. Enjoy the episode.
One day we will be remembered.
Princess Mary was born the 8th of December, 1542, during an unusually cold winter. Her father was King James V of Scotland, and her mother was Queen Marie of Guise, a French heiress. And it was said that Mary was born prematurely, and at the time of her birth, she was the only surviving child of her father, the king. Her father, King James, was the son of Margaret Tudor and nephew of King Henry VIII of England. Princess Mary was only Princess Mary for 6 days, because her father then died, likely of dysentery. And at 6 days old, Princess Mary became Mary, Queen of Scots. The king is dead. Long live the queen. There was a story. I'm going to call it a Renaissance urban legend. It was told by John Knox, a famous Presbyterian pastor who really, really hated women. So I choose to believe it was just a tale. But as the story goes, when King James found out that his wife Marie had had a girl, he already suspected that he was going to die because he was already very sick. He supposedly said about the royal house of Stuart, "It came wi' a lass and it will gang wi' a lass," meaning it started with a girl, Marjorie Bruce, and it would now end with a girl, Mary, Queen of Scots. Spoiler alert, our little queen found a loophole and it didn't end with Mary, Queen of Scots, but John Knox didn't like women, especially women rulers. Maybe he said it, but also that was kind of stating the obvious. The Stuart line had gotten control when the Bruce line ran out of legitimate male heirs. The very same thing that was happening to the Stuarts now. It did eventually come true by way of Mary's great-great-granddaughter, Anne, Queen of England, who died without surviving children. Rumors were spread that the little premature Queen Mary was sickly. This doesn't seem to be true, though. She was reportedly healthy and strong for her age, with an English diplomat, Ralph Sadler, saying, "It is as goodly a child as I have seen of her age, and is like to live." But obviously, Queen Mary, at 6 days old, was far too young to run the country, so a regent was needed, and Dowager Queen Marie was still in her childbed. She wasn't equipped in the moment to fight for the regency. So they were down to 2 options for regent. One was the Catholic Cardinal Beaton. His claim was based on the will of King James, that his opponents claimed was fake. The other was the Protestant James Hamilton, Earl of Arran, who was at the time second in line to the throne. The Earl of Arran had more support, and he became regent to the disappointment of most of the Catholics, including the very Catholic Queen Mother. King Henry VIII of England was thrilled with the development of Scotland's 6-day-old queen. He had a rivalry with his late nephew, King James V, so he proposed that the baby Queen of Scots be betrothed to the 4-year-old heir to the English throne, Prince Edward. He was hoping to unite the United Kingdom with the marriage of the Queen of Scots and the future King of England. Their firstborn son would become king of both nations. A treaty was signed that said when the baby queen was 10 years old, she would be married to the then 14-year-old Prince Edward, and she would move to England to be raised by her future father-in-law, King Henry VIII. The treaty also stated that if the couple failed to produce children, the countries would remain separate. So the Protestant regent was making deals with the same king that they had lost their last king fighting against. The Catholics weren't happy with this development. The Catholics didn't want the Protestants in charge, and they didn't want to work with Protestant England. They wanted to work with Catholic France, who, to be fair, had a less violent history with Scotland than England had. Beaton fought back and pushed for the French alliance. He also wanted to move the baby queen from the residence of her birth to a safer Stirling castle. The Earl of Arran rejected this, But Beaton showed up with a group of armed supporters, and Erin had to back down. Queen Mary, at the age of 7 months, was moved with her mother to Stirling Castle, escorted by about 3,500 armed men. Mary was crowned as Queen of Scots at 10 months old. Reportedly, the ceremony was solemn, but that was the tradition. It wasn't the party that it was in England.
Long live the Queen.
Shortly before the Scottish Queen was crowned, the English king arrested some Scottish merchants on their way to France and impounded their goods. This caused understandable anger in Scotland. The English king was pushing the boundaries of their relationship. The Scottish anger backfired hard on England. The Protestant regent decided he wanted nothing to do with this English nonsense. He became Catholic and decided to start pursuing a French alliance hard. They canceled the treaty, agreeing to betroth the 2 royal children. So the King of England was running out of powerful allies in Scotland. He did what he did, and he began the rough wooing. It wasn't as cute as it sounds, though. It was the war version of, he only picks on you because he likes you. And I don't ever love that dynamic. Let's end that here. King Henry waged some pretty heavy war on Scotland, trying to force them to honor the marriage treaty. So some call it the rough wooing, and some call it genocidal warfare. Potato, potato, I guess. The English mounted a series of attacks against the Scottish and the French. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and he was just forcing them together more quickly through his attacks. Rough wooing isn't the move, guys. In 1544, the English invaded Edinburgh, and 1.5-year-old Queen Mary was taken to Dunkeld for safety. So the Scottish Catholics were under attack by the English, but they did have control of the government, still at this point. The Scottish Protestants were not happy. They wanted to make nice with the English, but instead, they were being invaded. 2 years into the rough wooing, some of the Protestant lairds were angry, and a group of them killed the Catholic Cardinal Beaton. So it looked like the Protestants may come out ahead in Scotland, until 8 months later, when King Henry VIII died. That was a pretty hard blow to the Scottish Protestants. King Henry had been one of their most powerful supporters. The king is dead. Long live the king. So it was looking pretty good for the Scottish Catholics. They still had France on their side. But then, in 1547, just 9 months after the English king, the Scots lost a pretty major battle. Despite their crushing defeat, the Scottish refused to come to terms, and the little Queen Mary was smuggled out of the country. King Henri II of France, not the 8th of England, agreed on the condition that Queen Mary be betrothed to his 3-year-old son, the Dauphin of France, the same deal that England had wanted. The regent, Erin, the Catholic formerly known as Protestant, agreed to the betrothal. If I'm honest, it makes way more sense. The Catholic queen had a very Catholic, very French mother. A marriage with an English Protestant prince was doomed to fail. King Henry VIII just wanted Scotland, but so did King Henri II of France. So 5-year-old Mary, Queen of Scots, was smuggled into France to be betrothed for a second time, this time to the French heir to the throne. Mary was accompanied by her own court, including 2 illegitimate half-brothers and the 4 Marys. 4 girls, all her own age, all named Mary. To cut back on the confusion, but 5 little girls named Mary seems like it maybe would be more confusing. These 4 Marys were the daughters of some of the noblest families in Scotland: Beaton, Seton, Fleming, and Livingstone. The 4 girls were cared for by Mary Fleming's mother, Janet Fleming, who was also the half-sister of Queen Mary's late father. She was appointed governess to all 5 Marys. Guys, it's a joke. I don't know if 16th century humor translates now, but the 3 Marys is from the Bible. So this was a play on that. It was the 4 Marys. See, it's funny because they changed the number. And because there were actually 5 Marys, because Mary, Queen of Scots, was also a Mary with her 4 Mary friends. Jokes were different back then. Maybe it was funnier in French. I don't know. But it was like, haha, funny joke, the 4 Marys. Mary, Queen of Scots, was one of the few royal retinue that was not seasick. She teased her friends for the trip because she was the only one who stayed not puking. Janet Fleming was their governess for about 7 years until she left back for Scotland because of an affair with the French king, so that's its own story. Upon arriving in France, Queen Mary was met by her French grandparents. Queen Mary was, according to contemporary descriptions of her, charming, vivacious, beautiful, and clever. She was very congenial as long as her grandeur was respected. She had a sharp wit and was a natural conversationalist. She was very popular at the French court with everyone except her future mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici. Henri II had decided, along with his mistress, the order of the royal children and who would outrank who. It was decided that Mary would outrank all of the French royal children because she was, after all, a reigning queen. She walked ahead of Catherine's children in any formal proceedings. Mary learned to play the lute and the virginals, was competent in prose, poetry, horsemanship, falconry, and needlework, and was taught French, Italian, Latin, Spanish, and Greek, in addition to her native language of Scots, and she was taught to dance. She shared a room with her eldest sister-in-law, and all of the royal children were schooled together. Her future sister-in-law, Catherine, became very fond of Queen Mary and retained nostalgic memories in later life. Queen Mary's own mother believed that if she did not stay in Scotland, she would risk her daughter's crown. Unfortunately, this meant living in a separate country from her daughter. It probably helped that the Dowager Queen's mother was still back in France. So little Queen Mary had her grandmother with her, and she acted as one of her young granddaughter's principal advisors. When Mary was 6, her mother came to France. Scotland had made peace with England, finally, and this was her first opportunity. The mother and daughter appeared during a festival together, celebrating the French helping the Scottish to defeat the English. While her mother was in France visiting Queen Mary's older half-brother died, making Mary her mother's only surviving child. Mary was considered a pretty child, and later, as a woman, strikingly attractive. At some point during her childhood, she had contracted smallpox, but the case didn't seem to be a bad one, and she escaped it with relatively few scars. Queen Mary was eloquent, and like her mother, she was exceptionally tall for her time. She reached a height of 5'11", or 1.8 meters. Her betrothed, Francois, was reportedly unusually short and suffered from a stutter. King Henri, France's father, reportedly said, "From the very first day they met, my son and she got on as well together as if they had known each other for a long time." And this seems to be true. From all reports, the two children got along wonderfully, and Queen Mary was very fond of Prince Francois, and he was happy to follow behind her. In 1558, when Queen Mary was 13, she signed an agreement agreeing to bequeath Scotland to France if she died without children. That's a risk. It's unclear if she understood exactly what she was signing. But by this time, she was far more French than Scottish, and although her allegiances lay with Scotland, she likely wouldn't have seen the problem with uniting Scotland and France. But it was a secret because Scotland was not likely to respond well to this agreement. 20 days after she signed this agreement, she was married to the Dauphin of France, making Mary future Queen Consort of France, and Francois the King Consort of Scotland. By this point, Queen Mary's old betrothed had already died. His older sister, the Catholic Queen Mary, had been queen. The king is dead. Long live the queen. But just after Mary married the Dauphin, that Queen of England also died, also without children. There was a bit of dispute about who would follow her. The Catholics wanted it to be Queen Mary, as she was Catholic and a direct descendant of King Henry VII of England. The Protestants wanted it to be King Henry VIII's youngest daughter, Princess Elizabeth. The Catholics argued that Princess Elizabeth was a bastard because her father was already married to Queen Catherine when he married Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn. The Protestants argued that that was the very reason that King Henry left the church in the first place, and just because it wasn't a Catholic marriage didn't make it illegitimate. But England was largely on Princess Elizabeth's side. As we've said before, popular opinion has a lot to do with who the monarch is. So Princess Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth I of England. The Queen is dead. Long live the Queen. It helped Elizabeth that her father's will had specifically stated that he did not wish his Scottish relatives to be included in the line of succession. When England proclaimed Elizabeth their queen, King Henri of France proclaimed his son and daughter-in-law were the King and Queen of England. He was trying to unite France, England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland under the reigns of his son and Mary, Queen of Scots. So Mary, Queen of Scots, and Queen Elizabeth I were both claiming to be Queen of England. So they didn't have the best impression of each other, despite being related and having never actually met. When Mary, Queen of Scots, was 16, her husband Francois was 15, and things changed in a pretty major way. The King of France died from a splinter, a real bad splinter. He was jousting, and a large fragment of lance broke off in his eye. The lance that did the damage, ironically, belonged to the captain of the Scots Kingsguard. Accidentally stabbed by a Kingsguard. Yikes. Jaime Lannister, anybody? The royal surgeons decided to go with a wait-and-see approach. Like, the eye looks pretty bad. Let's see if this large fragment of wood works itself out. Except this splinter was so large and so bad that it also caused brain damage, an infection, and the king died of sepsis 10 days later. The autopsy found that he had cerebral abscesses and the infection had spread throughout his brain. So the king is dead. Long live the king. 15-year-old Francois was King Francois II of France, and 16-year-old Mary was his queen consort in addition to being Queen of Scots, and the purported Queen of England, Ireland, and Wales, though a lot of people disagreed with that last part. By this point, Mary, Queen of Scots' maternal family, the Guise family, was pretty powerful in French court. Meanwhile, back in Scotland, Mary's mother was struggling to hold on to her daughter's throne. The Protestant lords had allied together and were calling themselves the Lords of the Congregation, because as we learned from the Lord's Appellant, a snappy nickname always helps. But they were opposing Queen Mary's mother because, by congregation, they meant Protestant congregation. And she was only holding on to power through the use of French troops. By 1560, the Protestant lords of the congregation were fed up with the French troops, and they invited the English troops back to Scotland to back them up. The Dowager Queen asked her daughter for more French troops, but France was having Protestant uprisings of their own. The French Huguenots were French Protestants, Calvinists, and Mary needed the French troops to suppress them. Too many Protestants, not enough troops to suppress them. So Mary sent her mother's brother to Scotland to negotiate a peace. Maybe they would listen to a man. While they were negotiating in Scotland, their sister, Mary's mother, died. This made the situation more complicated for obvious reasons, and they needed to get it all sorted out. A treaty was signed by Mary's representatives that France and England would both withdraw their troops from Scotland and let Scotland figure out Scotland. France also recognized Elizabeth as the rightful Queen of England, which they hadn't done before. But Mary, still in France and mourning her mother, refused to ratify the treaty. And then things got worse for the young Queen of Scots. Her husband, Francois, got an ear infection. If this doesn't sound bad to you, that's because you live in a world with antibiotics. They didn't. Francois's middle ear infection got worse, and there was a lot of pus. The royal doctors decided to puncture the abscess and allow it to drain, and a lot of pus came out, way more than you would expect from even a bad ear infection. The infection spread to his brain, just like his father's eye infection had spread to his. King Francois II died at the age of 16 from an ear infection. Mary was grief-stricken. Just 6 months after the death of her mother, she was also a widow. The king is dead. Long live the king. The new king was Francois's 10-year-old brother, Prince Charles. The new King Charles IX, and Mary's mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici, was the new regent for her son. Mary had never been liked by her mother-in-law, and now that she wasn't the Queen of France, there was no reason for her to stay in France. So she was headed back to Scotland, where she was still technically queen. But Mary hadn't lived in Scotland since she was 5 years old. She had never, in practice, been the Queen of Scots. When she arrived in Scotland in August 1561, she was seen as a heavy threat to the Scottish Protestants. As a French Catholic, well, half French, half Scottish. And Mary, who was a Scottish queen raised in France, didn't fully comprehend the complicated politics in Scotland. And she hadn't exactly endeared herself to the people or the Queen of England. Scotland was divided by a feud between the Protestants and the Catholics, and Queen Mary's half-brother, the Earl of Moray, illegitimate son of her father, was on the side of the Protestants. The Protestants also had John Knox, a powerful Presbyterian preacher who firmly believed that women ruling in any way was unnatural and against the teachings of the Bible. He wanted no queen of any kind, and he was pretty sure God agreed with him. He preached against Mary, the fact that she still attended Mass, she danced, and she dressed elaborately. For shame.
Shame! Shame!
Queen Mary summoned John Knox to her presence so she could protest his preaching against her. She was like, dude, that's not nice. Stop being so mean. But it was unsuccessful. Later, she charged him with treason, but he was acquitted and released. John Knox seemed to have public support. And the Catholics were not happy with her either. She was being too tolerant with the Protestants in their opinion. She also kept her half-brother, the Earl of Moray, as one of her chief advisors. who was also a Protestant. He may have been a Protestant, but he was also Scottish, and he had grown up there. He understood the complicated political situation in Scotland. She needed his help. Mary's council was made up of 16 men, and only 4 of them were Catholic. The other 12 were Protestant. This likely wasn't an accident or even mismanagement. She was still angling to become Queen of England.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.